Welcome to the Under the Lights podcast. The podcast for up-and-coming cinematographers, lighting camera operators, and photographers. Learn from the professionals and land the bigger projects. Please welcome your host, Cy Gamble.
So how do we like that music? Shall we get going with this, the first episode? Hi and welcome to the Under the Lights podcast with me, Cy Gamble. I'm a freelance DOP from the north of England and I've been working across video production for over 10 years now. I started as a producer and worked my way over to DOP by just simply learning on the job. But I've spent the last 5 years really studying cinematography and I'm finally at a point in my career where I feel like I'm ready to take on the bigger projects. However, landing those projects is extremely difficult for those coming from a corporate background like myself. With that in mind, over the coming weeks, we'll be chatting to industry professionals across a range of disciplines. We'll be giving us hints and tips and just a little bit of chit-chat around how to break into their areas of the industry so we can hopefully push on and push ourselves as far as we can go. I really hope you enjoy it, and if you do, drop us a like or a comment on whichever channel you're on, or even better, put us in your WhatsApp group, tell your mates. Let's get some traction going. So with all that said, let's kick off today's number one, the inaugural podcast, with a fantastic guest, a person who I went to see present in Manchester and was so impressed by his talk, I brought the whole family back to watch him. It's my honour and it's my privilege and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the conservationist and cameraman behind Sir David Attenborough's Blue Planet and Planet Earth, Mr. Doug Allan.
Thank you for that introduction. That's very flattering.
So you get to work on some amazing projects with wildlife and nature all over the world. And my first question to you is, do you ever have to pinch yourself?
You do have to. The times when you pinch yourself are at the two extremes, either when something amazing is happening in front of you or when you're sitting out some blizzard at minus 35 and you're thinking, what the hell am I doing here?
So as somebody who's so used to travelling, being out there in nature, are you finding the current lockdown difficult to deal with? Do you miss travelling?
Oh, well, I certainly, miss the ability to just travel around freely. Obviously, most of the filming for me has just closed down, and a lot of the public presentations, which you so enjoyed with your family, they've all totally hit the skids. So it's been a bit quiet, but hopefully things will pick up in both respects next year.
When the lockdown's lifted, which is hopefully very soon, all being well, are you hoping to get back out and do more of your conservation work, your talks?
Yeah, I'm hoping so. Right now, I was back in March, just about as lockdown came in. The month of November was scheduled for a tour of theatres in Ireland, which usually goes down well. So we had about 24, 25 theatres lined up, and they have to be lined up about 7 or 8 months beforehand. And by sort of middle of April, it was looking pretty iffy. So we put them all on hold for a wee while and then cancelled them, and that was what we'd had to do anyway. So that will probably be the first one to get resurrected.
Oh, fingers crossed.
Next year, once things go. But, I think, sadly, venues like that, theatres, public gatherings will be the last thing to get opened up.
Yeah, here's hoping it's not too long now. At this point, I just wanted to take the listeners back in time, back to your university days. You actually graduated with a degree in marine biology back in 1973, which is where your love of conservation came from. I just wanted to ask, at what point did your photography meet with this interest for marine life, and how did the two interject?
Yeah, well, photography was the last of my passions, so to speak. I just built my life. I was going to say career, but it's not really a career at that point. I just built my life on things that interested me. So I got into diving at school. That led me to an interest in biology and marine biology, like you say, at university. And I decided when I was there that I enjoyed understanding science and helping scientists, but I didn't want to be a scientist. So I came out and went on various expeditions I went to the Red Sea a couple of times. I worked in Germany. And then the big break came when I went to the Antarctic with the British Antarctic Survey. And that was as a diver, really, as a support diver for the biologists. And that was really where the photography bug hit hard. Stills photography initially. You remember we're way back in the days of film, we're not in the days of video. So filming was almost unknown down there. Anyway, I took down stills cameras and I found myself interested in partly the wildlife, but more the sort of whole lifestyle of being on base, capturing just the strange way of life that we had down there and what the place looked like, etc., etc. So in a way, it was almost like photojournalism that I was doing initially. And of course, the wildlife is so easy in the Antarctic because there's no polar bears down there. So most of the animals are really approachable. You just go up, sit down 4 or 5 meters from them, and they just carry on behaving like they would do normally.
And at one point you were based on the island of Signy, part of the Orkney Islands. And I understand this is where you got your first big break.
And that particular base we were on, Signy, was a wonderful little oasis of life, really. It was about 3 miles long, 2 miles wide, and it had tens of thousands of Adelie penguins, chinstraps, gentoos, what have you. Really fantastic array of wildlife. So I started doing a lot of stills photography. I did one contract, then another contract. And at the end of the second contract, we had a BBC crew come onto base just for a couple of days. And in that crew was David Attenborough. And it was a very small crew, only 4 of them. And they were in the Antarctic doing some pieces to camera, some presenting pieces for David's new series, which was Living Planet, which was his follow-up to Life on Earth. So I ended up helping them for most of those 2 days. I took their cameraman underwater and I walked David and the crew to various places to get the best views for what they wanted. In that time, I just thought, gosh, what a fantastic life these people are living. They're traveling around the world. Pardon me, they seem to be doing something worthwhile. There's no doubt it seemed to me adventurous. It seemed to me glamorous, to be honest. And it seemed to me to be very worthwhile. But it was also a kind of continuation of the lifestyle that I had got accustomed to, i.e., in the Antarctic through the winter, we were living on a base with just 11, 12 other men through the Antarctic. So I quite enjoyed being part of small teams. And here was this very small team travelling around together, but so obviously having a great time together.
So from that initial meeting, did you get a chance to ask for any sort of tips, any advice?
So I asked David and the others, how do you get into the business? And they explained about being freelance and all the rest of it. And I began to think about how I could get into it. And I remember one thing that I think it was Ned, the producer, or it might have been David, said one night round a bar. He said, what's interesting about you, Doug, is that, he said, if I want to go to Africa, for example, there's a dozen people that I can phone up and ask about elephants and when to go and where to go and all the rest of it. But if I want to come back to the Antarctic, I'll have to come to you because I don't know anyone else who knows how to manage in the cold and diving under the ice and the animals and all that, and obviously has an eye for a photograph. So that set me thinking. And he also sort of implied, when you're going to get started in the business, play to your strengths. And my strengths were in the cold, underwater.
So from the initial meeting and the time spent around the bar, what were the next steps towards becoming a BBC camera operator?
So the next step was really, I had the chance to go down south again with the British Antarctic Survey again, but no diving, no biology. In fact, not even a rock within 120 miles. Our base was called Halley, and it was top of an ice shelf, and it was ionospheric science. However, 12 miles from the base, there was a colony of emperor penguins, and they're the big penguins, they're the ones that breed through the winter. So they're hard to access. So before I went south on that contract, I bought myself a 16mm camera and made numerous trips up and down to the penguin colony through the winter. And before I went, I contacted the BBC, and a producer wrote back to me who was very interested in emperor penguin footage. So he gave me a list of stuff he wanted, and I shot that. And then when I came back to UK, again, this has all taken a long time, but I took him the footage. He liked it. He asked me to look into where you would go and when you would go to film a whole string of other birds. And it didn't take me long to realise that if he went back to that place, Signy, I had spent 3 winters already, if he sent someone down for a whole summer, he would get all he wanted. Now, he didn't have enough money in the budget to send his very experienced cameraman down there for that amount of time. So he offered the contract to me at a much reduced rate, but he did point out, if you do this, then the first film in my series, which is about polar birds, I'm kicking off with Antarctic birds, and probably 20 minutes of that first half hour is going to be yours. And you couldn't hope for a better showreel, something to showcase your abilities, than a professionally edited, soundtracked, narrated first half hour of a fairly high-profile series. So that's what happened, and I just carried on from there, bouncing, off my experience and sticking. Or that's why a disproportionate amount of my filming has been in cold places and underwater, because that's where I started with a head start. And then once you do a few shoots, people start coming to you because they want you to do it, and so you manage to stay, so to speak, ahead of the opposition for a long time, until eventually, other people start going. But that's how I got into it. So it was really interesting. So I owe David and the others that introduction, and then it took 3 or 4 years to feel that I could launch myself full time as a filmmaker.
Wow! What an incredible story! It's an absolute dream start in the industry as well. I'm just in awe. Not only bumping into the one and only Sir David Attenborough, but having the initiative to then capitalise on the opportunities following that. It's just a great story. I just wanted to move the conversation on a bit, if I can, by talking a little bit about shooting in 16mm film and the practicalities of doing so. I know that in sub-zero temperatures, mechanical film cameras have several advantages over their digital counterparts, but could you explain the pros and cons of shooting film in this environment?
Shooting in 16mm was simultaneously much, much simpler than shooting electronically, but it was very hard on the nerves, because with film, film has to be sent back to UK, processed in the laboratory, a print made, and then someone has to look at it. Whereas with electronic, you shoot it in the morning, you look at it over lunchtime, and you improve on it in the afternoon. So the thing with filming, and particularly in the Antarctic, where it was a very remote place in those days, and when I filmed at Halley in the winter, there was no way to send any material out to be looked at, to be critiqued, or to make sure everything was working, things like that. I just had to remember what I'd shot in terms of the different shot sizes and thinking this is going to cut with this. And then I had to hope that the camera was working. And that was the big difference. And also, film was expensive. Film, even back then, would cost about £20 a minute by the time you bought the film, got it processed, produced the print that you could view on. That's how expensive it was. So you really had to think when you pressed the trigger. Electronically, you could reuse tapes, or nowadays you can reuse the fancy CF cards that we have. You can use them as often as you want. So once you've bought the card, it lasts almost indefinitely. But back there, film was expensive. So you had to have a self-discipline, but also a memory for the shots, so that you didn't just shoot too much film. And that producer that I worked with originally, he used to try to film on 10-1, which means if you were making a half-hour film with Jeffrey, he gave you about 5 hours of film to use. Now, that is really tight for wildlife, really tight. A more normal ratio for the bigger series would be about, people try to shoot on 40 or 50-1, which might sound quite high, but you've got to roll on things, to get the end results. And also remember, in those days, that when you're shooting on film, you start recording when you press the button. So if you're getting even a simple shot like a bird flying off a branch, you have to ideally anticipate 2 or 3 seconds before it happens when that bird is going to take off. And that's when you press the trigger, and hopefully it does it. But if you press the trigger and it doesn't take off, give it 3 or 4 seconds and then cut. And then the stupid bird flies off the nest. So you miss the actual movement of it leaving. Whereas with electronic, we have this cache recording where we can be recording without actually recording, so to speak. So you set your cache recording on 3 seconds. It means when the bird takes off, you press the trigger and you've got not just the takeoff, but also the 3 seconds before the takeoff. So that can be useful.
So when you say shooting 5:1, 10:1, it's a ratio. You mean 5 minutes for every 1 minute used, 10 minutes for every 1 minute used. What implications did this have on what you needed to take with you?
So filming was just unlike electronic. It was you had to carry obviously enough film for whatever you were doing, and 10 rolls of film was fairly heavy, much heavier than a compact flash card, for example. But on the other hand, the cameras were lighter. There was much less equipment to carry around. We didn't have to carry around so many generators, so many batteries. The cameras themselves were robust, really robust, and Arriflex was an incredibly robust camera. There were problems occasionally at very, very cold temperatures, where basically the film would get very brittle.
Oh wow!
Inside the magazine, and I had trouble once or twice where, as the film passed through the mechanical gate of the camera, it would sometimes crack from one side to the other. So you would get these hairline cracks across the emulsion, and there wasn't much you could do about that. You just had to hope that it wasn't going to happen. But there were certain film stocks that were more prone to that. But generally, it was simpler days back in those days, as I say, lighter equipment, etc., etc.
So what did it feel like to be out there working often on your own?
The beauty of filming site in the Antarctic, what I enjoyed about the Antarctic, what was interesting, was that when I went to the Antarctic and did a lot of filming in the Antarctic and the Arctic, I kind of realised that it was like having Africa to myself. There were all these wonderful stories and animals which hadn't been covered yet, but which, particularly in the Antarctic, I knew about because I'd spent such a long time down there. I mean, I knew how spectacular it could be underneath the ice in the winter, what the chances were of getting a leopard seal doing its hunting technique on Adelies, and several other things. And these big sequences were just waiting to get picked up for the first time. So when you did film them, and you filmed them well, when you were given the budget or the production experience to do them well, then they really were groundbreaking. Whereas I think now there are still some big spectacular things to get shot, but some of the time now we're going back, we're revisiting things that we did shoot, but we're just doing it that little bit better. We're doing it in super slow-mo, we're doing it in high definition, 4K even, and there's no doubt that picture-wise, as far as the picture on the screen is concerned, it's just amazing what you can get. I stand in awe in front of in front of a TV shop or an electronic. I stand in awe in front of a shop selling televisions, in front of an 80 or even 100-inch television, and I just look at the quality of the picture, the way that you can see into the shadows, the amount of detail that you can see. There's no doubt that on its own makes a sequence look much better than it would have done when I started filming it.
It must have been an exciting time and a great feeling to almost be the pioneers of shooting in the Antarctic. How much pride do you get from seeing your work included in these productions?
It is great to see it eventually on the big screen. When you see it, when the building blocks, the shots that I have taken become crafted by a good editor into a powerful story, which has all the drama, which has all the subtleties that he or she brings to the table to make that work visually, and then layered on top by a producer who has a sensitive feel for the music and the commentary. And it's just great to see it all come together. And it is amazing. We have For a big series, you might have 350, 400 filming days for one episode in a series. And when you start making a program, you don't just rush out and film any old thing. There's a whole lot of research. There's 6 months of research by 2, 3 researchers, some assistant producers, what have you, all looking around for new stories that you can tell, or stories that you've seen before but which can be told from a different viewpoint with new equipment. And they look into it and they decide which ones to go for, and then they decide when is the best time to go, etc., etc. And so you as a camera person are in the right place at the right time, hopefully. So you bring back the shots, you give them to the editor and the producer, and then that's where the magic almost starts to begin. And it's important along the stage when you see that end product. It's important to remember that it is the work of a team, not just of one person.
I can tell you're a very humble person, Doug. Can you just explain how you plan for these shoots and what the expectations are?
So you've started your program or your series with a big list of things you want to shoot. Some of them you won't get. You just won't get because you're aiming too high, or the weather's bad, or something happens to the animals, what have you. So some of those shoots you won't get. Some of the ones that you do get will be more effective. They'll somehow work better. So instead of planning to run them for 2.5 minutes on the screen, you might get 4 minutes on the screen. And then you'll get some things that don't deliver, and you'll get some things that are completely new, some things that you actually didn't know about when you started the series. So my point is that you start with some ideas, you go into this enormous mix of things that are successful, unsuccessful, and then you've got all these little episodes, and then the amazing thing is that at the end is that something that feels seamless and looks beautiful comes in within 20 seconds of how long you wanted it to be in the first place.
Wow.
And that's quite remarkable. And people, you don't think about that. You haven't got the timing flexibility on a television program that you do in a feature film. Feature films can last anything from 90 minutes to a couple of hours. So a little bit longer in the story here and there doesn't really matter. But in wildlife, it's really important. Television doesn't matter if you're in a drama or anything. You have to bring it in within that slot.
Do you see that changing? Do you think it has changed with the introduction of streaming services?
You still tend to get the streaming services sticking to these slots, 1 hour, 45 minutes, what have you. And it would be nice if you got away from that completely. So you just ran something for as long as it was worth it. But on the other hand, the commissioner, the person who's giving you the money to make that program, probably expects it to come in within a certain time frame because he or she will want to be able to sell it to television networks around the world where the timing is more important. So we're still sort of tied into finishing, bringing programs in to a specified time.
I just want to take this opportunity to just take a slight step back and ask, as somebody who didn't have any formal training in camera work or sort of piecing together sequences, how did you learn how to do that?
I taught myself how to film actually by looking at programs and then breaking them down into different shots and seeing how each shot was constructed, so to speak, and then looking when the commentary came in, when the commentary stopped, how much there was, when the music comes in, when the sound comes in. And I began to get a feel for how I could film things in the best way to give the editor the most options down the line to make what they could of what I brought back. And again, with filming, starting off on film, you did kind of start with this discipline of having to be aware of how much you were shooting. You couldn't just shoot indefinitely. And that to some extent is something that you carry on over. What you have to remember, actually, even no matter when you're filming, is that some poor sod has to look at this stuff. So if you give them too much, then they haven't got time to find the very best shot. Because the difference between the very best shot not quite there is tiny, it's marginal. So you have to be sort of thinking as you watch it, that was a good take. You also have to be aware that 10% of the shoot will get you 90% of the material. And the other time that you're there, you're going for the 10%, the big close-ups or the shots that will really make the difference. They are not usually the easy ones. So you have to know where to spend your time, so to speak, when the behaviour is in front of you, in terms of, am I going to need lots more big close-ups, or do I need more slow motion in this? What do I need to make this sequence work?
So how much of that planning can be tackled at the pre-production stages, and is there an understanding that nature can obviously be unpredictable? Do producers understand there's a lot of time lost to tracking animals, understanding their behaviours, in order to obviously get the shot that they want?
Well, it's obviously producers come with different experiences. The most experienced producers will they will have all that in mind, and they will be understanding about you going away and coming back with perhaps less than they expected. They know that something has been a problem, but at the same time, often, they will explain to you the sort of style of the sequence. Some of them may draw what's called a storyboard, which shows you that this is how they think the sequence will go together. And it's useful to have that, but it is very much just a guide, and it's especially a less in a way than useful guide if you're setting off to film something that has rarely been filmed before. Because if you're going to do that, then any idea of a storyline or anything like that has just got to be coming out of the imagination. And it's much more a case then of you going and getting a feel for the whole behaviour, how it starts, how long the hunting is, because the actual moment of when the predator hits the prey, that can be a tiny amount of time. So you need to be able to build up to it, to build away from it. You might find characters developing as you see them. You might find you've got a group of lions or something, and there becomes one who somehow becomes the main character in that sequence. So you might spend more time filming him or her, because that gives you the option when you cut that sequence of making it character driven, so to speak. So you talk a lot with the producers. You have a feel about the feel of the series, as a whole. But also, it depends. If you work with the same producer a lot, and they like what you offer and you like their way of approaching things, then you tend to get a relationship going with the producer whereby you trust each other. He or she trusts you to come back with the material, and you trust them in the hands of the editor to make the best job of it.
We're roughly halfway through the podcast with Doug Allan, so we're going to take this opportunity to take a short break and find out about a great competition we're running to win a signed book. See you soon.
Under the Lights Podcast.
Hello, it's me again, back to tell you about our fantastic competition that we've got to win a personalised and signed copy of Doug Allan's book, Freeze Frame. All you have to do is answer the following question, which is: Doug Allan graduated from university in 1973 with a degree in which subject? That is, Doug Allan graduated from university in 1973 with a degree in which subject? Send your answers to hello@utlpod.com, short for Under the Lights Pod, and we'll draw a winner at random on our Facebook page at UTLPod at the end of this series. Get your entries in now.
Under the Lights Podcast.
So we're back now with Doug Allan, and I wanted to kickstart the second half by talking to you specifically about your work under the ice. You must have noticed a lot of change over the years since you began diving in the Antarctic.
The equipment now, to be honest, does make it more comfortable to dive under the ice, although it will always be cold. The advent of full-on dry suits, heated undersuits and things like that certainly makes it very different from when I was diving in the Antarctic. When I started in the Antarctic, we were diving with wetsuits, which now they weren't exactly standard wetsuits. They were quite thick and they didn't have any zips or stitching, so you did stay toasty warm, but you weren't down for that long and you weren't that deep. But now we're diving with dry suits and things. But it's certainly something that with experience you you do probably get better at it. It's quite important under the ice, particularly if you're over deep water. It's important to be able to control your buoyancy happily. But on the other hand, sometimes that's important in the open water. The thing that can sometimes make under the ice easier is it is so calm. There is no swell underneath the ice. Often the visibility is better than a topside film in the summer because there's no swell and because it's often a little bit gloomier than it would have been in the summer. There is very little plankton growth, and there's all the sediment in the water just settles out. So it can give you exceptional visibility under the ice, and the absence of swell makes it very gentle under there. Sometimes currents can be running, and that's obviously a problem. The big difference really with topside and underneath the ice is that getting back onto or getting to the surface under the ice involves you have to get back to that hole that you cut. In some places we're diving underneath ice that's 3 meters thick, and so the only way out above is to get back to that hole. So in some cases you would use a safety line. Obviously, if there's any sort of current, if the viz wasn't good, you do that. But one of the beauties of the place, I think that I may have spoken in the presentation about, was in the Antarctica, a place called McMurdo, where the visibility is exceptional and where there are no currents under the ice. And because the visibility was exceptional, and by exceptional I mean 300 meters, just gin clear, we were able to dive without safety lines directly up to the hole because we knew how much air we had, and we worked with spare air left, so to speak, when we went back, and we could always see the hole from where we were working underwater. So that was a pretty exceptional thing, but it's not for everybody, but it's just a matter of the more diving experience you have, then I think the more straightforward it is to move to underwater. Although nothing can really prepare you for that slap of cold when you go in there. It's always going to be cold. Underneath the ice, if there's ice on the sea, then the water must be below -1 degree centigrade. Seawater freezes at 1.7, and it obviously starts to melt about -1, -0.5, something like that. So if you're diving underneath sea ice, then you're in pretty cold water. And that, means that you've got all the mitts on, you've got a hood on, and you're diving in a dry suit. You need lots of experience with that sort of equipment before you will be happy underneath the ice, and you have to be able to control your buoyancy, and controlling your buoyancy inside a dry suit is very different from inside a wetsuit. But all that sort of equipment is becoming more mainstream now. People in clubs will have dry suits and will dive all year round, what have you. So increasingly people are able to do that. Whereas again, if you go back to when I was starting, yes, there were comparatively few of us who were equipped to do that sort of thing.
So what does an underwater camera rig look like now, and what are the limitations of the technology when diving under the ice? For example, looking after the batteries, keeping lenses moving, just generally operating in temperatures that are well below sub-zero.
When you're going into the cold with an electronic camera, a big electronic camera, not the DSLR, the big electronic camera is like a RED, for example, which we use a lot. It's basically like a computer. There are very few moving parts, but when you turn it on, it starts to generate its own heat. So the secret to keeping a RED going in very cold temperatures is to make a kind of windproof, insulated, what we call a barney for it, which is it's the same effect as you wearing a thick duvet puffer jacket to go outside. If it's cold, you can go outside with a puffer jacket just with a t-shirt underneath, because your body generates some heat and the puffer jacket stops it escaping. So if you want to work with in very cold temperatures, and we're talking about minus 25, 30. You're talking about working a camera in there, an electronic camera in there. You buy an insulated jacket, and you take enough batteries that you can keep your camera in standby, ticking over, generating heat for the whole day, for example. And because your camera is like pre-warmed, it will fire up immediately, just like it would do normally. On the other hand, lenses can be a problem because there isn't the same electronic capacity in a lens. There's not the same electronic capacity or volume of electronics in a DSLR stills camera. So just switching your DSLR on or switching your lens to standby doesn't work the same. It doesn't have the electronics in it to ticking over to keep it warm. So it might be that before you go into the cold with your red in the lens, that you want to check that lens somewhere cold, because it could be that at cold temperatures the focus, for example, could stiffen up. The lubricating oil in the focus could stiffen up. Likewise, the zoom, perhaps even the aperture. And all these things we work on are manual. We work on manual settings when we're shooting. So in that case, what I do is I have a friendly freezer store just down the road in Avonmouth, and that has a blast freezer which can cool things down really quickly to about minus 35. And if I'm taking a lens that I'm not familiar with somewhere cold, where I know it's going to be that cold, I'll take it down there, put it in the freezer for a couple of hours, and then come back and see how it's performing. And if it's getting too stiff, for the servos to work, the zoom or whatever, then that lens has to go and be winterized, which means it has to be sent to an engineer, stripped down as if it was being serviced, and then when they build it back together, they replace the normal oil with a much lighter, thinner oil, which won't get sticky and viscous at low temperatures. So you take that away, that works fine, and then when you come back, you have to do the same thing in reverse, because that oil will evaporate under normal temperatures over time. So you bring it back and you have it de-winterized. If it's really cold, you might have to get different cables. We have cables running from the camera to the viewfinder, what have you. Viewfinders are tricky. If it's an LCD, it's like some of the older ones, then at low temperatures, those LCD, the liquid crystal displays, will actually freeze up. So that when you move the camera around, the image can't change fast enough in the sort of mushy, semi-frozen liquid crystal display. So you have to get something else. You have to work with a different kind of monitor. So you take plenty of batteries, take your Barney, and that's okay. Underwater, it's really a matter of you can take pretty much the same camera as you use topside. You can take it underwater by putting it in basically a waterproof box, a waterproof housing. And there are controls on the outside of the housing which either mesh directly with the controls on the side of the camera, or give you a straight mechanical link between them, or some of the new ones work through a piece of electronics whereby you can control things using Bluetooth inside the camera. So you can change the settings on the outside and then Bluetooth control the camera from the inside. So it's all about technology comes along and makes things possible. Remember, if you pick up an underwater camera with a big camera inside it, something like a red, if you pick up that housing on the surface, it could well weigh 25, even 30 kilograms. But remember that when you put it in the water, it will have been designed, and you can put trim weights on it. It'll be designed so that it's neutrally buoyant underwater. Just like a 5,000-ton ship floats when you put it in the water. Well, a housing, it doesn't float, but it will go down and it is neutrally buoyant. We have the means of adjusting it, because a camera in fresh water has got less buoyancy than a camera in salt water. So if you trim your camera to be okay to film in a river or a lake, and then you take that to somewhere like the Red Sea, which is much saltier, you will have to add little weights on the underside of the camera to help to bring it down, to bring it neutral. And ideally, that underwater camera should sit. It shouldn't twist in the water. It shouldn't go nose down. It shouldn't go tail down. It should just sit nice and level, and it means that you're just moving something that's weightless. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have drag. If you're working in a current, then obviously the current moves against the housing. And if you're working with a big housing, then that can be quite a push against the housing. But as far as weight is concerned, it's neutral underwater. And again, because the coldest temperature underwater can be -1, -1.8, the secret is to get the camera prepared, keep it warm somewhere, and then put it into the water fairly quickly. That way it doesn't cool down. And it generates its own heat inside the housing. The housing will lose heat to the cold water, but it's never quite enough to stop the camera. The camera might get a little bit less battery power than you do normally, but you don't really have to modify the camera very much to take it underneath the ice. You have to think out more modifying it if you're going into very cold temperatures topside.
During filming for Life in the Freezer for the BBC, I recall a shot of a leopard seal coming right up to you, right up to the camera as you sort of lay buoyant in the water, displaying this penguin that it had just killed. How do you find generally that animals react to you and the camera in the water? Are they always that playful?
That animal reaction really depends on the animal, and not only on the kind of animal, but the sort of mood that it's in. And even fish have moods. And by that, I mean, if you're if you're in the water with a pod of dolphins or a single whale or a manta ray, for example, certainly among the mammals, there are as many personalities among the mammals as there are among humans. So in amongst the pod of dolphins, you'll have some who are really brash and want to show off. You'll have other ones who are a bit wary. You'll have parents there with their youngsters who aren't quite so sure about it. And you'll have the ones that are downright friendly and other ones that are curious but a little bit wary. So you get all kinds of things, all kinds of reactions to you. But it's important to remember that just like when you meet a dog for the first time on land, it's important how you behave. In fact, how you behave determines how the dog will behave. And it's similar underwater. So you have to sort of give off the right sort of underwater vibes, whatever that is, because underwater you have to be close to your animals and you can't hide from them. Topside, we can use big long lenses from a long way away. We can be inside a blind where you can't be seen. None of that is applicable underwater. If you can see the animal can see you. And the rule or the guideline for underwater is that you should wait until an animal is 1/3 of the distance that you can see it until you film. So if you can see a whale distantly at 50 metres away, and you need it within about 13 metres before it's worth filming, because beyond that distance, its outline is just too fuzzy and vague, and there's too much, rubbish between you and the thing. So you have to go close. There's no way you can hide from these things. I like working with mammals because, as I say, we're mammals, and I think you can get a relationship.
So speaking of relationships, is that something that you can develop over time with the animals?
If you get the chance to work with the same mammal or be in the company of the same mammal for more than once, let's say for several days in a row, then I can guarantee you, if you've played your cards right, that animal will be behaving differently by the end of those days as it was at the beginning. Two examples. We did a long shoot in Tonga, and there was this female humpback. And now you can recognise individual humpbacks because of the patterns underneath their flukes. And we found this one particular humpback who became quite friendly. And sometimes she would hang out in a bay, not every day, but sometimes we'd go around there and she'd be there. And we must have dived with her 4 or 5 times. And by the end, she would recognise our boat, and she would come and she would hang underneath our boat.
Oh, that's
amazing.
amazing.
We would go into this bay and just put the engine into low revs. You're not revving up and down in and out of gear. You're just puttering around. And when we got into this bay, if she was around, she would come and she would, as we switched off the engine, just drifted, she would come and she would sit right at the nose of the boat, looking up from underwater, waiting for me to go into the water. And then when I went into the water, she'd give me a check over, and then she would just be happy to spend lots of time in my company. And I've noticed the same with polar bears again, where the fronts of glaciers are good places to go and look for polar bears, because the front of the glaciers, even in winter, lumps are falling off the glaciers and they break the ice. So the ice is often broken at the front of the glacier. And that's a good place to go looking for polar bears, because the cracks in the ice mean that there's lots of seals living around there. So we went to this glacier on a Monday and there was a polar bear skulking around, and we got some shots of it. But every day until Friday, we could go back to that glacier and the bear would come and mooch around for an hour or so, because once the polar bear comes back to an area, it knows that its best chances of hunting a seal are probably in the first hour or so. After that, most of the seals in the area have either been spooked or they know she's there and they'll leave, temporarily. So she comes back, or he or she, the bear, comes back more or less, for a period every time, having given the seals a chance to calm down in the meantime. And as I say, by the time we got to Friday, after having spent 5 days with that bear, several hours every day, the bear was much more relaxed in her company than she had been at the start. So it wasn't that she was tame, but she was kind of habituated. The ultimate habituation comes perhaps with wild animals, comes perhaps in Kenya, Africa, for example, at the game parks, where the animals are so accustomed to seeing vehicles that's the way you film them. You put a camera mount on the door and you stay in the vehicle all the day, and you can drive up to within meters of these animals when they're doing things, and they just are completely unbothered. But you don't get out of the vehicle, partly because it's not safe, but mostly because the animals would run away, because they're so unaccustomed to people on foot, whereas they are completely accustomed to people in vehicles. And that's, in a way, the nice thing about working in the Arctic in particular, is because there aren't vehicles trundling around, and quite often if you meet a polar bear, it could well be that you are the first human being that polar bear has ever seen. And it's just great to feel that you're in the company of a truly wild animal, especially one that's making such a good living up here somewhere that you find so difficult.
And long may that continue. We're quickly running out of time. There's a few things we need to cram in, but I want to just take a moment to talk about your very important conservation work. I think we're all aware now of how much of an impact our behaviour as humans is having on not just the ice caps, but our planet as a whole. Your talk was the first time that I'd been presented with the level of reduction in ice around the poles, and obviously the impact that has on the wildlife that lives there, and it was shocking to say the least. I wanted to ask, what changes have you personally noticed since you started working in conservation?
Well, I've always been interested in conservation. Up in the Arctic, when I first went to the Arctic in 1988, I think it was what I'd call the end of the stable season. You would go out with the Inuit on the ice, and they would know when the ice was going to start to break up. They know where it was going to crack from, and all those parameters have disappeared. It's things are happening much less regularly. It's causing a problem for many film shoots. If you go out and intend to film on somewhere where the ice should be solid, then it may not be solid. There may not be any ice there at all. So that's changing things undoubtedly. I could take you to places in the Antarctic. There's one classic place where, when I worked on Sydney, to get from one part of the island to another, you had to walk over a glacier. The glacier stretched all the way down to the sea. It was a steep face, and you had to walk over the glacier. Well, now you just walk around the beach, because in the time that I've been there, the glacier has retreated so much that you can now just walk along the beach line. The glacier doesn't even reach the sea now. So it's those physical things. And as I say, the poles are hugely variable. All this extreme weather that we're having around the poles, that's caused by climate change. But because the poles are changing faster than anywhere else on the planet, you've mentioned the loss of sea ice up on the Arctic, sea ice covering the ocean. Well, down in the Antarctic, if you take somewhere like the peninsula, which is that part of Antarctica that reaches out like a big finger towards South America, well, the average winter temperatures, or the winter in the peninsula, is now 5 degrees warmer than it was in the 1960s. It was one of the fastest warming changes on the planet. And Yeah, I could, again, take you to places or show you places where increasing sea level because of melt of the sea ice, and also because the ocean is getting warmer. And when you warm a liquid, it just expands. But whole areas, not just remote places like some of the islands in the middle of the Pacific, but places like Florida, Miami, are having real problems with sea level rise, washing away part of their beaches and flooding up through their sewer system and all this sort of stuff. That's all coming about, but because of climate change. So it's not just; it is very definitely affecting human beings in some of the most civilized parts of the world. And I think the flooding that we're getting in UK, the regular extreme flooding that we're seeing through February and March and things, that is probably linked to climate change. And that's causing a lot of problems. Try selling a house that's been flooded a couple of times in the last 5 years.
This is it, and I think it's something that I've noticed even on a smaller scale. I've been to Iceland a couple of times over the last few years, and there's one glacier that we visit quite often that has marks on a rock as to where the glacial ice forms each year, and every year every mark has been lower and lower to such an extent that we went this year and the glacier just didn't seem to be there anymore. We could, like you said, walk around the beach.
No, there is some of the rates of decline, some of the rates of the glaciers receding is really remarkable. It is meters per year.
Yeah, it's undoubtedly not a good situation to be in, but what's the answer?
Well, we just we just have to do big things quickly because we haven't done nearly enough in the last 20 years. This thing's been getting flagged up now for 30 odd years longer, and there's been very little done about it, or what there is just been tinkering around the edges. So we need to see big action around the world. The UK has got 2050 carbon neutral plans. Those need to get moved sooner somehow. It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a change in the way that we think about our lives. And maybe the change is hardest for the middle-aged people or the older people because they're accustomed to how it was. But there's certainly, the youth of today can't expect and don't expect actually to be living their lives the way that we have ours. And we just need to make a big push towards all the good things, whether it's electrical vehicles, renewable energy, subsidised public transport. We just need to stand back and really think about some radical big ways of doing. And COVID shows when there is a big threat, we can pull out the stops, we can do something about it. That's the kind of effort that we need to be making for climate change, not from 2030 onwards, but between now and 2030.
Very well said, and hopefully the right people are listening to this podcast. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of the podcast, but we have got time for a couple of audience questions. A reminder that if you'd like to submit a question, you can do so by emailing hello@utlpod.com. Our first question of the first episode comes from an Olga Yakimenko, who asks, is there a piece of work or a moment that made you stop and think, yes, that's it, that's what I want to do?
Well, what you in terms of highlights of my filming life, probably two. One was when we captured a polar bear swimming. It was swimming in open water. It was a glorious day, just flat, calm, and slightly overcast. And this bear was really accommodating. We were able to go very close with it. Very close to it in the boat with a little remote camera, slipped it down underwater and got some lovely shots of this bear just paddling. And it was intriguing because when a polar bear swims, it only uses its front feet, front paws, front legs. The back ones just trail behind it. And we followed it for an hour or so, tracking it past the icebergs and things. And we got some lovely underwater shots of it. And then the other one that would stick in my mind was recently where Doug Anderson, and Doug's another great underwater cameraman, he and I were really the first people to do a good job on the killer whales using their tails to make a wave to wash the seals off the ice floes. And that was something that I'd heard about many, many years ago and I'd been kind of looking for and tried it a couple of times, been unsuccessful, but then it all came together on that one shoot and we saw lots of hunts and lots of waves and we ended up with a very spectacular sequence. So those are the two that really stick in my mind. But really any time in the company of mammals is good fun, particularly underwater.
Brilliant. So the second question is from someone called James, and he asks, I shoot a lot of corporate work, but my heart is in wildlife photography. I'm in the process of building a portfolio, but how do I work my way into this area?
Wow, that's tricky. Well, obviously, if you're working with corporate stuff, you must know your way around the equipment, etc. Although, you may well have a full crew of assistants helping you, so to speak. I think, James, my best suggestion to you would be look out for wildlife film festivals. There are two in America. There's Missoula every year, and there's Jackson Hole every second year. And then in UK, there's Wildscreen, which happens every 2 years. Now, those are usually great places to go and to mix with people and to put names to faces and things like that. Unfortunately, they were all, obviously online virtual this year. But I would look out for the next one and try to make yourself down to that. Think about making a showreel. Yes, I know it's difficult. It's very difficult getting a showreel together based in UK, but study the different ways of making a wildlife film, how different it is from corporate. Teach yourself to make sequences with wildlife, and then start to make contact with independent production companies and take them your camera experience, but maybe don't expect to be a camera person. Initially, be prepared to spend some time possibly being an assistant. But if you have the drive, you will get there in time. And like anything, it's the bottom rungs of the ladder that are the hardest. But once you meet someone who will trust in you and gives you the opportunity, then if you're good, success will follow.
That's great advice. And the final question of our audience questions section is from someone called Martin, who's asked, was there one piece of work that inspired you?
Well, funnily enough, the thing that inspired me wasn't so much a piece of work, it was a book. Back in 1957, the great French underwater explorer Jacques Cousteau, who really invented the aqualung, he wrote a book called The Silent World. And that was all basically his autobiography in a way, almost up to that point. Told how he developed the aqualung, told of his early adventures in the 15 years after the war, or 12 years after the war. And I remember reading that book when I was about 10, and it made such an impression on me. This is, I was just in the sort of stage where I was into adventure stories, and that book was fairly simple to read, and that was where I'd, got the love of, or where I started to develop the love of diving. And I read it again fairly recently. I can absolutely understand why it took me, because it's a wonderfully written book. And as I say, because I would class my life as just putting one passion on top of another, I think the most important one to put in there at the bottom was actually the diving, and everything just followed on from that. So I'll have Cousteau's Silent World.
Great stuff. So finally, before we clock off on the inaugural Under the Lights podcast, we've got the Desert Island kit bag. So we're going to set the scene here. We're stranded on a desert island. You've got 3 pieces of equipment that you're allowed to take with you to document your time there, and that includes 1 camera, 1 lens, and 1 light. What would you take, Mr. Doug Allan?
Would it be cheating if I took my iPhone? Then I could phone for help. It's true, modern iPhones, especially the newest one, phenomenal camera inside them, just fantastic, easily almost broadcast quality, really, in super slow-mo and panning facility and all that sort of stuff. If I had to choose a single camera, I probably, funnily enough, would choose a stills camera rather than a movie. There's something about stills which gives them, more permanence somehow. That was part of the reason why I wrote my book, the freeze frame book. I just wanted somewhere permanent to put my collection of stills and writing to. So I'd probably choose the DSLR. I'd probably choose something like one of the latest model of the Sony A7, which is great in all sorts of lights. It's fairly small. And I think I actually probably would take a wide angle. I do love scenics. I do love big, wide scenics that take in the sky. And somehow, the big, wide scenic for me puts you in the place. The animals show you the detail, but my overall impression, I do love going to wild places with big horizons. So I'd probably choose a good wide angle zoom, maybe a 17-40 or something like that, and work with that on my A7 that would let me shoot in all kinds of light. And I could do a bit of movie if I wanted to. Light, I'm not sure if I'd take a light because I tend to work with natural light. So I guess just a small dado light, as we call them, perhaps, just for throwing some light into the shadows, or a small flashlight, a small independent flash gun, just to fill in the shadows, something like that. But I don't have a specific type in mind, so to speak. As I say, there is these lights called dados, which are very small LED type lights. You could take something like that, and enough batteries in a generator to keep them all running.
Such a fantastic answer, thank you. And it's been a huge pleasure to talk to you today. And don't forget to enter our competition to win a signed copy of Doug's book, Freeze Frame.
It's my pleasure, Si. And obviously, I will hold on to the book for the moment. And when you let me know who the winner is, I'll be happy to write a personal message inside and sign it.
Thank you, Doug Allan. Well, that's it. Our first episode is over. I want to take the opportunity to say a huge thank you to Doug for taking the time to talk to us. It's been a huge privilege to do so. Hopefully it's given you some good insight into what it's like to become a BBC wildlife camera operator. And Doug has very kindly donated a personalised and signed copy of his book Freeze Frame for one lucky listener. So if you'd like to be in with a chance of winning, please answer the following question. Doug Allan graduated from university in 1973 with a degree in which subject? The answer, just to give you a hint, is somewhere in the pod. Email your answers to hello@utlpod.com, short for Under the Lights, and the winner will be drawn at random on our Facebook page, UTL Pod, at the end of this series. All that's left to say is a huge thank you for listening. It takes a long time to plan and produce these podcasts, so I really hope you found it interesting and useful. If you'd like to leave some feedback or requests for future episodes, please drop an email to hello@utlpod.com. If you enjoyed the pod and want to support us, please drop us a like, subscribe, or even better, recommend us to a mate. On next week's episode, we have documentary DOP Jonathan Young, who will be talking about his route into the industry, his work in combat zones, and remaining professional under fire. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe through the usual channels. The pod will be out next Monday. I've been Si Gamble. Thanks for listening.